Mom forgot a present for my son while my sister's kids got heaps. I zipped my son's jacket and left silently. The next day, I struck them from the trust. 20 minutes later, Dad phoned, needing $4,200. By evening, 47 calls from Mom. Christmas morning at my parents' house was supposed to be magical for my son, Lucas. He'd been counting down the days since Thanksgiving, marking each one off with a red marker on the calendar. He was only 7, and this holiday held so much extra weight because it was his first Christmas after losing his father, my husband Derek, just 8 months prior. Derek had collapsed right there in our kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, and just like that, our entire world shattered. I was still learning how to piece it back together. I pulled into my parents' driveway at exactly 10 a.m., just as my mother, Diane, had requested. Lucas clutched a bag of gifts he'd picked out himself for his grandparents, his aunt, and his 2 cousins. He'd used his allowance, supplemented by cash he earned helping our elderly neighbor rake leaves, to buy everyone something thoughtful. A ceramic coffee mug with painted sunflowers for my mom. A leather keychain for my dad, Gerald. A dinosaur coloring book for my 5-year-old nephew, Tyler. A sparkly headband for my 8-year-old niece, Emma. And a vanilla-scented candle for my sister, Brooke. The front door swung open before we even reached the porch steps. Brooke stood there, impeccably dressed in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her highlighted hair cascaded over her shoulders in perfect waves. Behind her, the living room looked like a department store Christmas display. Piles of wrapped presents surrounded the tree, their shiny paper catching the light. Finally, Brooke drawled, not bothering with a greeting. "Mom's been asking where you were." I checked my watch. We were 3 minutes early. Lucas ran inside, his excitement a bright, desperate little flame, despite the cold reception. I followed more slowly, carrying his gift bag and a casserole dish of scalloped potatoes I'd promised to bring. My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a festive apron. She hugged Lucas briefly, then looked past him toward the door. "Just you two?" The question stung. Derek had been gone for 8 months, but still, every single time I showed up somewhere without him, she'd hit me with some variation of that question, like I'd just forgotten to bring my husband along. My blood would run cold. "Just us," I confirmed, forcing a smile. Gerald emerged from his study, newspaper tucked under his arm. He patted Lucas on the head absently before settling into his recliner. Tyler and Emma came thundering down the stairs, shrieking about wanting to open presents. Brooke's husband, Martin, followed at a more measured pace, coffee mug in hand, looking like a man who had already accepted that the day would be exhausting. We gathered in the living room, and my mother began her annual role as gift distributor. She positioned herself by the tree like a game show host, reading names off tags and passing packages. Tyler received present after present, a mountain of toys accumulating around him, a remote-controlled car, a Lego set with over 500 pieces, a tablet computer that made my eyebrows shoot up given he was only 5. Emma opened gifts with similar abundance, squealing over an American Girl doll, a jewelry-making kit, an elaborate art supply set, and several outfits that looked like miniature versions of Brooke's wardrobe. Lucas sat patiently, hands folded in his lap, waiting for his turn. The pile beneath the tree dwindled. Tyler and Emma continued unwrapping, creating a sea of discarded paper around them. My son's eyes tracked every package my mother picked up, hope flickering each time she read a name aloud. Then, the last present went to Emma, a pair of white ice skates with pink laces. My mother brushed her hands together, surveying the wrapping paper carnage with satisfaction. "Well, that's everything under the tree." Lucas looked at me, confusion creasing his small forehead. "Mommy, where's mine?" The air just sucked out of the room. Tyler looked up from his tablet, already absorbed in some game. Emma paused mid-twirl. Martin suddenly became very interested in the bottom of his coffee cup. Brooke examined her manicure, as if the answers to life's mysteries were hidden beneath her gel polish. I turned to my mother. "Mom, where are Lucas's gifts?" Diane's hand flew to her mouth in what I recognized as performed shock. She had used this exact gesture my entire life whenever she was caught doing something she fully intended to do but wanted plausible deniability. "Oh no," she said, her voice pitched a touch too high. "Oh, sweetheart, I must have. The gifts must still be at the store. I ordered them." "I'm sure I did, but with all the holiday chaos. You forgot to pick up my son's Christmas presents?" My voice was barely a whisper. Gerald lowered his newspaper, looking genuinely bewildered. Whatever arrangement my mother had made regarding gifts, he clearly hadn't been informed that Lucas had been left off the list. "These things happen," Brooke said, finally looking up from her nails. "Kids are resilient. Lucas understands, don't you, Lucas?" My son nodded slowly because he was 7 and had been taught to be polite to adults. But I saw his lower lip tremble before he caught it between his teeth. I saw the way his shoulders curved inward, making himself smaller. This was a child who had already learned the world could be devastatingly unfair. He had watched strangers in dark suits carry his father's casket out of a church, clinging to my hand and asking me why Daddy had to go to heaven without saying goodbye. And now this. I stood up, my movement abrupt enough to startle everyone. "Lucas, let's get your jacket." "We haven't had dinner yet," my mother protested. "The ham won't be ready for another 2 hours. Brooke scoffed. "You're seriously leaving because of a simple mistake? This is so typical of you, always making everything into a huge dramatic production." I walked to the front closet and retrieved Lucas's jacket, the blue puffy one he'd picked out himself because it had a hidden pocket perfect for storing treasures. I knelt down to his level, zipping it up, carefully smoothing the collar. "Did I do something wrong?" he whispered, quiet enough that only I could hear. My heart cracked along fault lines I didn't know existed. "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Not a single thing." "Then why didn't Grandma get me presents? Tyler and Emma got so many." How do you explain that to a 7-year-old? How do you even explain that to a 34-year-old woman who thought she knew her own mother? The truth was, my mother had simply decided that my child mattered less than her other grandchildren, and she hadn't even bothered to construct a believable excuse. I took Lucas's hand and walked toward the door. "You're being ridiculous," my mother called after me. I said I would make it up to him. I didn't respond. I didn't turn around. I simply opened the door, guided my son through it, and closed it behind us with a soft click. No dramatic slam. No shouted accusations. Just a quiet exit. The kind that leaves more of a mark than any explosion ever could. We drove home in silence for the first few miles. Then Lucas asked if we could get hot chocolate from the drive-through coffee shop near our house. I said yes. We sat in the parking lot, drinking our hot chocolates, Lucas with extra whipped cream and chocolate sprinkles, me with mine plain. And I told him that sometimes people make choices that hurt us, even when we haven't done anything to deserve it. He asked if Grandma didn't love him anymore. I told him I couldn't speak for Grandma, but I loved him enough for 100 grandmas combined. That night, after Lucas was asleep, I sat in my home office and pulled out the file my attorney had prepared 6 months earlier. After Derek's death, his life insurance payout and the sale of his wildly successful auto dealership had left me in a financial position I never could have anticipated. Derek had built that dealership from a single lot with 12 cars into a regional empire with 6 locations across 3 states. He had been smart about investments, meticulous about insurance, and utterly determined that if anything ever happened to him, Lucas and I would never, ever have to worry about money. The trust documents spread across my desk like a map of familial obligation. When I had first met with my estate attorney, Natalie Reeves, she had asked me thoughtful questions about my goals and concerns. I explained that I wanted to provide for Lucas's future, obviously, but I also wanted to help my parents. Gerald's pension from his 30 years at the manufacturing plant wasn't quite enough to cover their expenses, and Diane's Social Security checks only went so far. They had refinanced their house 3 times over the years to help Brooke with various financial emergencies, and the remaining equity was negligible. So, I had set up a trust that would provide my parents with a monthly stipend, cover their property taxes, and pay for any major medical expenses not covered by Medicare. The annual cost? Approximately $52,000. I had also included provisions for Brooke's children's education, setting aside funds that would mature when they reached college age. Tyler and Emma each had $200,000 earmarked for their futures, money that would grow over the next 13 and 10 years, respectively. None of them knew the specifics. They knew I was comfortable after Derek's death, though they drastically underestimated what comfortable meant. They knew I had helped out with their property taxes a few times, though they didn't realize it was an ongoing arrangement. They assumed the education funds were modest savings bonds, not substantial investment accounts managed by a private wealth firm. The morning of December 26th, I called Natalie and asked her to prepare amendments to the trust documents, remove my parents as beneficiaries entirely, remove the education provisions for Tyler and Emma, and redirect all funds to Lucas's future, with secondary beneficiaries being 3 charities Derek had supported during his lifetime, a local children's hospital, a veterans organization, and an animal shelter where we had adopted our dog, Biscuit. Natalie asked if I was certain. She reminded me that estate decisions made in emotional moments could be regretted later. I told her I had never been more certain of anything in my life. The documents were signed and notarized by 11 a.m. At 11:20, my phone rang. Gerald's name appeared on the screen. "Sharon, thank God you answered." His voice carried an edge of panic I had rarely heard from my father. "We have a situation. The property tax bill arrived, and it's $4,200 due by January 15th. Your mother and we don't have it. I was hoping you might be able to help us out like you have before." I let the silence stretch for a moment. 3 breaths. 4. "I'm not going to be helping with that anymore, Dad." "What? What do you mean?" "I mean that I've restructured my finances, and supporting you and Mom is no longer part of my plan." "Sharon, you can't be serious. We count on that money. You know our situation." "I do know your situation, Dad. I've known it for years, which is why I've been quietly paying your property taxes, contributing to your utility bills, and covering your medical copays. Did you ever wonder how you managed to keep the house after Mom's hip surgery? How the heating bill got paid last winter when natural gas prices spiked? That was me, Dad. Every time." The silence from his end told me this was information he either didn't know or had chosen not to examine too closely. "But yesterday," I continued, my voice steady, "you all showed me exactly where I stand in this family. You showed my son where he stands. And I've decided that my money needs to go where it's actually appreciated." "This is about the Christmas gifts, Sharon? That was a mistake. Your mother feels terrible about it." "Does she? Has she called to apologize? Has she driven over with anything for Lucas?" "It's been 24 hours, Dad. I haven't received a single message from her." He had no response to that. "I hope you figure out the property taxes. Maybe Brooke can help. She seems to be doing well enough to buy designer clothes and tablets for her 5-year-old. I hung up before he could say anything else. By 6 p.m. that evening, my phone had logged 47 missed calls from my mother. 47 separate attempts, not including the voicemails that had filled my inbox to capacity and the text messages that alternated between pleading and fury. Some were brief. "Call me. This is urgent. We need to talk." Others were longer paragraphs of justification and accusation. She brought up everything from my teenage years to Derek's funeral, claiming she had always supported me, that I was being ungrateful, that family was supposed to stick together. I read them all but responded to none. Brooke called twice. Martin called once, which surprised me since he and I had never been particularly close. I let those go to voicemail as well. On December 28th, I received an unexpected visitor. My mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, showed up at my door with a casserole dish and an expression that told me she had heard every detail of what had transpired on Christmas morning. Patricia had always been the black sheep of her generation, the sister who had moved across the country, married a musician, and refused to participate in the elaborate family politics that my mother seemed to thrive on. "I brought lasagna," she said. "And wine. Figured you could use both." I let her in, grateful for company that didn't come loaded with expectations or accusations. We sat in my living room while Lucas played with Biscuit in the backyard, the dog chasing tennis balls with inexhaustible enthusiasm. Patricia poured 2 generous glasses of red wine and handed me one without asking if I wanted it. Your mother called me yesterday, Patricia began. Wanted me to intervene on her behalf. Talk some sense into you, was how she phrased it. And you came here to do that? I came here to tell you that what she did was unconscionable. I raised 3 kids, Sharon. 3 birthdays every year, 3 Christmases, 3 sets of school events and sports games and recitals. Never once did I forget a gift for any of them. You know why? Because forgetting a child's Christmas present isn't something that happens accidentally. It's a choice dressed up as a mistake. The validation from an unexpected source made my throat tighten. She's been doing this for years, I admitted. Small slights, little exclusions. I kept thinking I was imagining it, being too sensitive. Derek used to tell me I wasn't crazy, that he saw it too. But I wanted so badly for him to be wrong. Derek was a perceptive man. I only met him a handful of times, but I remember thinking your mother was a fool for not appreciating him. He built something real with his life. That's more than most people ever accomplish. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Patricia told me stories about her childhood with my mother, how Diane had always needed to be the center of attention, how she had carefully cultivated favoritism with their own parents until Patricia simply stopped competing for affection that would never be freely given. She had moved to Oregon at 22 and never looked back. The distance saved my sanity, Patricia said. I love my sister in the abstract way you love someone you share blood with, but I don't like her. I haven't liked her since we were teenagers, and she told my prom date that I had a contagious skin condition, so he would take her instead. She didn't. She absolutely did. Showed up at my prom on the arm of a boy I had been dreaming about for months. Our mother thought it was hilarious. Said I should have moved faster. The patterns stretched back generations. This wasn't simply about me or about Lucas. This was a family culture that had calcified around cruelty disguised as competition. Before Patricia left, she pressed a check into my hand for Lucas, a proper Christmas present from his great-aunt who actually remembers he exists. I tried to refuse, but she insisted with the same stubbornness that must have helped her survive a childhood with my mother. The check was for $500, made out to Lucas directly. Open a savings account for him, she said. Or let him blow it all on Lego sets. I don't care either way. I just want him to know that someone in this family sees him. I hugged her at the door, this aunt I had barely known, and promised to visit her in Oregon sometime. The encounter with Patricia shifted something in my understanding of the situation. For years, I had internalized my mother's favoritism as somehow my fault, a failure of my own worthiness that I could correct if I just tried harder, performed better, demanded less. But Patricia's stories revealed a pattern that had nothing to do with merit and everything to do with my mother's fundamental inability to love equitably. I spent the next few days reorganizing my perspective, along with my house. Derek's clothes still hung in our closet, a shrine I hadn't been ready to dismantle. But grief operates on its own timeline, and something about the events of Christmas had accelerated my journey through it. I packed his suits and shirts and jeans into boxes, keeping only his favorite sweater, the worn navy blue one he had owned since before we met. The rest I donated to a veterans organization that helped men transitioning out of military service find employment. Lucas helped me sort through some of the items, telling me which ones he remembered his daddy wearing. The blue tie with tiny silver dots had been Derek's favorite for job interviews, he informed me solemnly. The brown loafers were the shoes Daddy wore when they went fishing. The leather jacket smelled like Daddy's hugs. We kept the jacket, too. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a strange kind of peace. Lucas and I built a blanket fort in the living room and watched movies. We went to the aquarium downtown, just the 2 of us, and spent 3 hours in front of the jellyfish tank because Lucas decided they were his new favorite animals. We made cookies shaped like dinosaurs and stars and ate too many of them for dinner one night because I said we could. We visited Derek's grave on December 30th, leaving a small bouquet of winter flowers and a drawing Lucas had made of the 3 of us together, stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. On January 2nd, my mother appeared at my front door. I watched her through the window for a moment before opening it, observing the way she clutched her purse like a shield, The way her eyes darted around the neighborhood, as if worried someone might see her in such a humble position. "We need to talk about the situation," she said the moment I cracked the door. "There's nothing to discuss." "Sharon, you cannot simply cut us off. We're your parents. That money, those arrangements you made, they're practically a commitment." "Practically a commitment?" I repeated, my voice ice cold. "Like a grandmother's commitment to treat all her grandchildren equally? That kind of commitment." Her jaw tightened. "The gifts were an oversight." "I already explained that." "Then explain why Tyler had a new tablet and 14 other presents under the tree. Explain why Emma received ice skates and an American Girl doll and an art supply set that I happen to know costs over $200 because Lucas asked for the same one. Explain how you had time and money and attention for all of that, but somehow managed to completely forget that your other grandchild exists. You're twisting this into something it isn't." "Am I?" "Tell me exactly how many gifts you purchased for Lucas, not forgot to pick up, but purchased." She didn't answer. "That's what I thought. You didn't forget anything. You simply didn't bother. Because that's the pattern, isn't it? Derek's funeral? You spent the entire reception talking about Brooke's kitchen renovation. Lucas's 6th birthday? You left early because Tyler had a soccer game. Every holiday, every event, every milestone in my son's life, you've made it abundantly clear that he's an afterthought. That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, though nothing about this was funny. "You want to talk about fair?" "Fair is my 7-year-old asking me why his grandmother doesn't love him. Fair is watching my child try to make himself invisible because he's learned that invisibility hurts less than hoping for attention he'll never receive. Fair is not what you've given Lucas. Fair is not what you've given me." My mother's expression hardened. "So this is about punishing us. Taking away our financial support because you're upset about one Christmas. This isn't about punishment. This is about protection. I'm protecting my son from people who have proven repeatedly that they don't value him. And I'm protecting my resources for people who deserve them. We're family, Sharon." "No. Family doesn't forget. Family doesn't favor. Family doesn't make a child feel worthless on Christmas morning while his cousins swim in presents." She stood on my doorstep for another moment, her face cycling through emotions I recognized from a lifetime of observation: anger, calculation, forced contrition, and finally something that might have been genuine shock when she realized none of her usual tactics would work. "This will destroy your father," she said quietly. "The stress of the finances at his age, with his heart." "That's interesting, Mom. Derek had a heart condition, too. Did you know that the doctor said it was congenital, something he'd had his whole life without knowing?" Stress made it worse. Guess how stressed he was trying to build his business, trying to provide for his family, trying to be good enough to earn your approval, despite the fact that you never thought a car salesman was worthy of your daughter. Guess how many times you commented on his profession, his background, his family's social standing. I stepped back. "But sure," I said, my voice cold. "Let's talk about Dad's heart." She left without another word. January passed. February arrived with a brutal cold snap that kept Lucas and me homebound for nearly a week. I used the time to work on my freelance graphic design projects, the career I had maintained throughout my marriage and had expanded significantly after Derek's death. Keeping busy helped. Creating things helped. Watching Lucas develop his own artistic interests, the way he attacked blank pages with crayons and markers and colored pencils, helped most of all. In early March, Gerald showed up at my door alone. He looked older than I remembered, diminished somehow, though only 2 months had passed since I'd seen him last. "May I come in?" he asked. I let him in because, despite everything, he was still my father. We sat at the kitchen table, cups of coffee between us, while Lucas played in his room upstairs. "Your mother isn't speaking to me right now," Gerald began. "We had a disagreement about how to handle this situation." "What kind of disagreement?" "She wanted me to tell you that we'd cut you out of the will if you didn't reverse your decision." I told her that threatening a woman who clearly has more money than we ever will is probably not the winning strategy she thinks it is. Despite myself, I cracked a small smile. "That's surprisingly self-aware." "I'm old, Sharon," he said, "not stupid." He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, staring into it as if reading tea leaves. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All those years of financial help, the taxes and the bills and the medical expenses, why did you do it? Because you're my parents. Is that the only reason? I considered the question. When Derek and I first realized how much money we had, I wanted to share it with the people I loved. I thought that's what family did. I thought that if our positions were reversed, you would do the same for me. Would we have? I hesitated. I used to think so. He nodded slowly. I wasn't a very attentive father when you were growing up. I know that. I worked too much, left too much of the child rearing to your mother. But I always thought I was doing it for you girls, providing for your futures. You provided. That's true. But I didn't notice things like how your mother always favored Brooke. Like how you were always the one who had to try harder, perform better, just to get a fraction of the attention your sister received for simply existing. He looked up, meeting my eyes. I'm sorry, Sharon. For not seeing it, for not doing anything about it. This was more honesty than I had ever received from my father, more acknowledgement than I had ever dared to hope for. I appreciate you saying that. I'm not saying it to get the money back. I know that's gone, and frankly, we probably didn't deserve it in the first place. I'm saying it because I should have said it 40 years ago. I'm saying it because my grandson looked at a pile of presents for his cousins and had nothing. And I sat there with my newspaper and did absolutely nothing about it. That's true, I said softly. You didn't. I should have. I should have emptied my wallet and driven to the nearest store and bought that boy whatever his heart desired. I should have told your mother that what she did was wrong. I should have stood up for him the way you do every single day. I felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. Why didn't you? I asked. Because standing up has never been my strong suit. Because going along was always easier. Because I learned a long time ago that opposing your mother came with consequences I didn't want to face. He set down his coffee cup. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking if I might be able to see my grandson sometimes. Not at the house. Not with your mother. Just him and me. Maybe ice cream or the park or whatever grandfathers are supposed to do with their grandsons. I'll think about it. That's more than I deserve. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said, Derek was a good man. I liked him. I respected what he built. I'm sorry I never told him that. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, thinking about family loyalty and the complicated mathematics of love. The following week, I received a letter in the mail from Brooke, handwritten, which surprised me since my sister communicated almost exclusively through text messages and social media posts. The envelope was thick, suggesting multiple pages, and I opened it with the weariness of someone approaching a potentially venomous snake. The letter spanned 6 pages of my sister's looping script. She began by recounting our childhood from her perspective, a revisionist history in which she had always been the overlooked one, the sibling who had to fight for scraps of attention, while I allegedly received our parents' endless devotion. According to Brooke's version of events, I had been the favorite daughter all along. My academic achievements celebrated while her social successes were dismissed as superficial. Our mother had supposedly pushed her toward an early marriage with Martin because she wanted to get rid of her, while I was encouraged to pursue my dreams and career. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I remembered those years completely differently. I remembered working 2 jobs during college while Brooke received monthly allowance checks. I remembered our mother critiquing my wedding dress as too simple while praising every detail of Brooke's elaborate ceremony 3 years later. I remembered Derek being excluded from family photos at Thanksgiving because he wasn't really family until we had been married for 5 years, while Martin was welcomed into the fold immediately. But memory, I was learning, was a flexible thing. People constructed narratives that protected them from uncomfortable truths, and Brooke had apparently built an entire fortress of alternative history around herself. The letter concluded with a demand. Brooke wanted me to reinstate the education funds for Tyler and Emma. She argued that the children were innocent parties who shouldn't suffer because of adult conflicts. She invoked their futures, their potential, their dreams of attending good universities and building successful lives. What she didn't mention was any acknowledgement of what had happened on Christmas morning. No reference to Lucas being excluded. No apology for her own role in the situation, sitting there examining her manicure while her nephew realized he had been forgotten. No recognition that her children's abundance had come at the direct expense of my child's inclusion. I wrote back a single sentence. When you can explain to me why Tyler deserved 14 presents and Lucas deserved none, we can discuss the education funds. I never received a response. The financial fallout continued to ripple through my family in ways I observed from a careful distance. Gerald mentioned during one of his visits that they had been forced to take out a small loan to cover the property taxes. The interest rate was unfavorable, and the monthly payments were straining their fixed income. My mother had sold some of her jewelry, pieces she had always claimed were priceless family heirlooms, but which apparently fetched only a few hundred at the local consignment shop. Part of me felt a pang of guilt at their struggles. These were my parents, the people who had housed and fed and clothed me for 18 years. But another part of me recognized that their struggles were a direct consequence of their choices. They had chosen to prioritize one grandchild over another. They had chosen to make my son feel invisible. They had chosen to take my support for granted without ever examining where it came from or what it cost me emotionally to provide it. Choices had consequences. That was a lesson I was determined to teach Lucas, and apparently it was a lesson my parents were learning too. Spring came slowly that year. By April, Lucas had started asking about his grandparents with less frequency, adapting the way children do to the new shape of their world. He had playdates and school friends and art class on Tuesdays. He had me, wholly and completely present in a way I might not have been if I were still expending energy trying to maintain peace with people who had never prioritized my peace. I let Gerald take Lucas for ice cream one Saturday afternoon. They went to the park afterward, and Lucas came home chattering about the ducks they had fed and the funny faces Grandpa had made trying to climb the jungle gym. Whatever faults my father had accumulated over a lifetime of passive observation, he seemed determined to address at least some of them in the time he had left. My mother continued her campaign of intermittent contact. Birthday cards arrived for Lucas with conspicuously generous checks enclosed, as if money could paper over the memory of that Christmas morning. I deposited the checks into Lucas's savings account, but I didn't make him write thank you notes. Some gestures don't warrant gratitude. Brooke reached out in June, her message dripping with a particular blend of accusation and victimhood she had perfected over the years. She informed me that Tyler and Emma were devastated by the loss of their college funds, which was interesting since I had never actually told them about those funds. Someone, presumably our mother, had spilled that information in an attempt to turn her grandchildren against me. The strategy seemed to have backfired, as Brooke was now dealing with children who believed themselves entitled to money that had never been promised to them. "You ruined their futures," Brooke wrote in her final text. "You took away their opportunities out of spite." I didn't bother explaining that opportunities one had created could hardly be called taken away when I simply chose not to give them. The distinction would be lost on someone who had spent her entire life receiving without ever considering the source. Summer arrived with warmth and long days. And with it came a new chapter one hadn't anticipated. A graphic design project connected me with a man named Marcus, a software developer whose company needed branding work. We collaborated professionally at first, then discovered we both loved terrible action movies, Thai food, and Sunday mornings spent at farmers markets. He had a daughter, Olivia, who was 9, and he introduced her to Lucas with the careful deliberation of a man who understood that children's hearts were not toys to be played with. Lucas adored Olivia immediately. She taught him complicated clapping games and helped him build elaborate structures with his Legos. Marcus taught him to ride a bike without training wheels, running alongside until Lucas pedaled confidently on his own. These were things Derek should have been there to do. And sometimes the grief of that truth swept over me like a wave. But Marcus never tried to replace Derek. He simply filled his own space in our lives, distinct, valuable, and chosen. When December approached again, I asked Lucas what he wanted for Christmas. "Can Marcus and Olivia be there?" he asked. "Of course. And can we make cookies shaped like jellyfish?" "We can try. And can I give everyone presents because giving presents is the best part?" I hugged him tightly, the small person who had taught me more about generosity and resilience than anyone I had ever known. We spent Christmas at my house that year. Marcus brought a turkey he had somehow managed to cook successfully despite setting off the smoke alarm twice. Olivia decorated a gingerbread house with Lucas, both of them getting more frosting on themselves than on the structure. Biscuit wore a Santa hat for approximately 45 seconds before shaking it off and retreating to his bed with a look of profound dignity. Gerald stopped by in the afternoon, bearing gifts for both children and a bottle of wine for me. He stayed for dinner, telling stories about his manufacturing days that made Olivia and Lucas giggle. He asked Marcus respectful questions about his work and listened to the answers with genuine interest. When he left, he hugged me at the door. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," he said. "Thank you for showing up," I told him. From my mother and sister, I received nothing. No cards, no calls, no olive branches extended. The silence from their end was its own kind of communication, one I had learned to interpret as clearly as words. They had calculated the cost of genuine reconciliation against the cost of continued estrangement and chosen the latter. Perhaps they believed I would eventually relent. Perhaps they simply couldn't imagine a version of reality where their behavior had permanent consequences. But consequences were something I had become very good at implementing. A week after Christmas, I received an email from Natalie Reeves. She had been monitoring the trust accounts as part of her regular duties and wanted to inform me that the investments had performed exceptionally well over the year. Lucas's educational fund had grown by 12%. The charitable endowments were generating steady returns. Everything was positioned for long-term stability. I printed the report and filed it in the same folder where I kept Derek's life insurance documents, Lucas's birth certificate, and the original letter Derek had written me the day Lucas was born. In that letter, he had promised to love and protect our son for as long as he lived. The cruelty of fate meant that promise lasted only 7 years. But I could keep it going. I could build walls around my child that protected him from those who would diminish his worth. I could construct bridges to those who valued him genuinely. I could teach him that love was not an obligation but a choice, and that the people who made that choice consistently were the ones deserving of his heart. The phone rang one evening in late January. The caller ID showed my mother's number. I let it go to voicemail as I had done 46 times before. This time, though, I listened to the message. Sharon. Her voice sounded tired, aged in ways that a single year shouldn't produce. I've had some time to think about Christmas last year, about all of it. I know you probably won't believe me, but I am sorry. Not sorry because of the money. Sorry because I lost my grandson. Sorry because I threw away something precious and didn't even realize it until it was gone. She paused, and I heard what might have been a shaky breath. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what you did, walking out quietly that morning with Lucas. That was dignity. That was a mother protecting her child the way I should have been protecting mine all along. The message ended. I sat with my phone in my hand for several minutes, turning her words over in my mind like stones at the bottom of a riverbed. Was this genuine reflection? Or another manipulation designed to restore access to my resources? There was no way to know for certain. What I did know was that Lucas was happy. He was thriving in 2nd grade, making friends, creating art, learning to navigate a world that had already shown him its capacity for both cruelty and kindness. He had a grandfather who was trying to make amends. He had Marcus and Olivia as new constants in his life. He had me, always and forever standing between him and anything that might threaten his sense of worth. Sometimes protection looks like confrontation. Other times it looks like walking away. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply close the door quietly and refuse to open it again until you're ready. I wasn't ready yet. But I was learning that readiness wasn't a destination. It was a process built one day at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of choosing my child's peace over my family's expectations at a time. Lucas came downstairs, biscuit at his heels, asking if we could have pancakes for dinner. Absolutely, I said, putting down my phone. What shape do you want them? Jellyfish, he shouted, already running to get his apron. I followed him into the kitchen, leaving my mother's message behind, unanswered, but not unheard. Some doors close gently, some stay closed for a very long time, and some eventually might open again, but only when the person on the other side has truly earned the right. So, I want to know, what would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever had to choose your peace over family expectations that felt anything but? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts.